Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today we have an extremely special guest, Pragathi Guruprasad. She is an entrepreneur, singer, and an actor who first gained widespread recognition through her participation in the popular Indian reality singing competition, Super Singer, which launched her career as an artist. She later ventured into entrepreneurship, founding Soma Ayurvedic, a company specializing in Ayurvedic skincare. In addition to her success in music and business, she has also made a mark in acting, with appearances in popular shows like Never Have I Ever and Hunters. How are you doing today?
I am great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I even in the conversation that we're having before, I have so many questions pop up because I just think one of the best ways that we can learn truly is through our unique experiences. And even in some of the things that you're saying, I was like, I have to get your insights on some of these things. But I want to first start with maybe how we met. We met volunteering at a table tennis camp, I think probably in middle school or high school.
Yeah, I
How
think
did
it
you,
was. I
how
think
did
it
you,
must have been middle school.
did you play table tennis back then?
I did. My sister was actually first, which is how we sort of got into it. Funny enough, both my parents, were state level athletes, but never like music was such a big part of our upbringing that they wanted to find a sport that was like the least distracting from music and like no injury prone. And so we landed on table tennis, and that's kind of how I ended up there. But I think that turned into such a community that I still love, and I'm still in touch with so many people there. And we obviously met there as well. And so, so many people still continue to pop up into my life from that, period of time, which I hold so close to my heart.
I mean, the naivety I feel like you get to share when you're a child is so unique. I think that's what most people miss when they were a kid. They're just like, I didn't even know all this stuff was happening in the world. I didn't know life could be this hard. You kind of just get to live in your magical utopia of where your friends and the people around you is the whole world, and then you get kind of snapped into this larger picture. I'm really curious, we've been having a few conversations on this show about Fremont and kind of tying back into the roots, and I'm really fascinated to get into that a little bit with you. So were you born in Fremont, or where were you born?
No, I was actually born in Singapore. My parents spent a couple of years there before on the way, I guess, to the US. So it was like India, got married in India. I was born in Singapore, and then we moved to the US when I was very young. But I was brought up in Fremont.
Hmm. What was that like? I mean, I think Fremont is a very unique. The more I leave it, I realize how unique of a place it is. I'm just before I
Absolutely,
even
yeah.
share my experiences, I'm just curious, what was Fremont like for you?
Yeah, I loved Fremont. And I tell a lot of people I have a love-hate relationship with it, but I'll start off with the reasons that I loved it so much. I think after having moved out of Fremont, like you said, you learn so much more about it, and you meet all these different kinds of people from, other places, and how their upbringing was. And I think for my parents having, left India, for them culture was, holding on to our culture and kind of passing that on to my sister and I was something that was so important to them. And we just so happened to land up in Fremont, which so many people call, more India than India is, in many ways. And I think it was very easy for them to find their people, for us to, have maybe culturally similar friends. And I think that led to, so many shared experiences with the people that I grew up with. And I think for me, my music also came from that. There were so many accessible resources and teachers and schools that were so, you know, so incredibly well trained that we were able to be a part of. And I think, sort of same with table tennis, right? We had some of the best coaches in the world, and that's because of sort of the area that we were in. And so I think it's funny, even when I go back to India now, people are so surprised that I grew up in the US. They're just like, you are, so culturally aware. You know more about the language, the culture, being Indian than people that grow up in India. You speak the languages fluently, you read and write the languages. And I think that I owe a lot of that to, the environment that we were in. And that's kind of what Fremont had to offer us. Um, which I think was such a big part of who I am today, and that identity that I have.
This concept of culturally aware has always been fascinated to me because I think I've had a very different experience in that I've always had me not being Indian enough as something that was weaponized against me for so long. I spent a
Yeah.
lot of time in India last year when we had first connected, and that was the first time in my life I really had to question, what does it actually mean to be Indian? What does it mean to be Tamil? And to kind of come to my own conclusions about that. I'm really curious,
Okay.
what was that like for you? Because you've spent so much time in India, you spent a lot of time also in the States. Where do you feel like you kind of find that balance for yourself? Like, what does it mean to be Tamil to you?
I think I would say I found comfort in not finding that balance because I was on TV in India, at a very, very young age. And I think their favorite kind of thing to say about me was that, I was from the US and they wanted me to be this like exotic American sort of thing. And that's the sort of story that that's the framework that they had for me. And I kept breaking that barrier because I was fluent in the language. I was picking up on the cues and, I just wanted to be one of them. I didn't want to have this exotic air about me. Um, and I feel like maybe I became even more fluent or more Indian. And we were talking about, how some of it is like flipping a switch. And I feel like I'm such a different person when I'm in India because I'm trying so hard to not stand out and not be American. And when I'm back
Mm,
here in America, growing up in Fremont, it wasn't, nobody looked at you weird because you were so Indian. But I think as you grow out of Fremont and you travel, people are like, you are so, Indian, and you have sometimes like my brain doesn't think in English and I have like, Tamil words or something for something that I'm trying to convey. And so I feel like it's a constant state of confusion where you don't fully feel 100% anywhere you are. And I've tried to find more comfort in the fact that that's such a privilege, to be able to feel that way, rather than
mm,
trying to find a balance and not feeling like enough in both places.
mm. It's so beautiful you phrase it that way because I think oftentimes it's used to detract from who you are, or you don't fit in either, that means you're less than. But in fact, even to kind of rephrase it the way you did, which is it's a privilege for me to be able to put myself in two different perspectives and understand them and view the world through both of them actually gives me a superpower rather than it taking
Absolutely.
away from my ability to navigate the world. I really liked your reframe on that. And
Definitely.
so yeah, I mean, I'm so excited to get into Super Singer, but you said you found music from a young age. Was that something? What was it that drew you to singing? I mean, was there something about it that made you feel alive or passionate? What was it about music for you?
I don't think it was intentional because I started singing when I was so young, and music kind of ran in the family. My dad was actually had like a school of music when we lived in Singapore, so he taught. My mom is a phenomenal singer. My grandparents are singers, so music was something that ran in the family, and my older sister sang, and so it wasn't really something that my parents wanted me to do. I was just doing everything that my older sister was doing. And so that's kind of how it began. And they were like, oh, she's like not bad. And so, they put me in classes in Indian classical music, both North and South Indian classical music. And it just sort of started as like okay, she's into this, like, let's just see where it goes. Um, I think it took me many, many, many years after to like really find what it meant to me and what music was to me.
Hmm. It's a beautiful process. I mean, I think even when you talk about, okay, they said that I was good, I think there's so much complexity and nuance to that, to, what is the relationship one has as they sing and what, I mean, I sang too, and I'm
Yeah.
actually quite terrible, but I really enjoyed it. And I can say that I honestly had such a lovely time anytime that I would sing, that I feel that it took me quite some time to get to that place. When do you feel like, what was that transition like for you? I mean, was there a time in your life where you feel like it started to make sense? You're like, this is something I love doing.
It's so crazy that you say that you ask because I think that transition for me was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. It was
Mm,
very, very long after it became a career for me, very long after, um, I was touring the world with my music, very, very long after, one would imagine. I think it was probably during, post-pandemic, almost maybe like 2 years ago.
What changed? What clicked?
I think the whole journey of like getting a break and like my music career starting all happened when I was very young. Um, and like as I started learning music, in Fremont, it was just sort of a never-ending rat race, and I feel like rat race kind of has a negative connotation, but to be honest, I was so young that I wasn't really, making decisions for myself. And that's not to say that, my parents made decisions that I didn't agree with, but my parents did think that I was talented and I was really good at what I did, so they pushed harder for it. I competed a lot, even, in Fremont or in the US. And then Super Singer happened when I was, 14. And that launched a whole, career. I started singing in movies, I started releasing my own music, I started going on tour. There was just one thing after another where there was never a point where it wasn't even a consideration for me to stop and be like, am I enjoying what I'm doing? Or like, is this meaningful to me? Do I like singing? Um, do I love music? Is there anything else I want to do? None of those thoughts happened because there was no real pause. And I think when the pandemic hit, and I also think that, when you're in a career and you're making money and you have all this recognition from such a young age, it's really hard because I think like your failures hit so much harder than they would when you're a fully developed adult. Um, and so I think when the pandemic hit and I was forced to kind of stop touring, I wasn't traveling to India and recording as much, all this different stuff was happening. I took that as a sign to like, okay, let me ground down in LA where, I am right now and really focus on being here. And I was, excited about getting into acting. I was excited to get onto like on camera stuff. I just gotten signed by a big agency out here in LA. And so everything just started to shift for me. And even my agents were like, we can work on your music, but like, it would be great if you can, do on camera stuff right now because, Hollywood is really excited about people that look like you and there's more opportunities. And so I took this like very unintentional step away from music for a couple of years. And when I reconnected, I want to say like as late as last year, I was like, I really miss doing this and I want to find a space in it that makes me happy again. And, what do I want to do and what makes me happy and what part of music and singing can I like what niche can I go into where I'm very happy about the music that I'm doing.
When you sing, what is that experience like for you? What do you feel? Or are you thinking or do you try to turn your mind off? What does singing feel like for you?
A lot of the times it feels like a very out of body experience because I feel like it's a very spiritual thing to, sort of be singing. And before I feel like I would think so much more about like, is everybody enjoying this? Is this good enough? Like, do I sound okay? Am I on pitch? Am I on tempo? And I think more recently I've tried to just start letting go and just being like, whatever happens, happens as long as I'm enjoying myself. And it's become a lot more of like a spiritual experience for me where I just sort of switch off.
Hmm. I mean, it's it's beautiful to hear because I think oftentimes when I speak to people who do different things or crafts, it's the thing that I'm really interested about is do you feel like there is a difference between how competent you are at something and like the experience of doing it? Do you feel like there's no relationship between the two? Like, can anyone who tries to sing have that same kind of spiritual experience that you're talking about? Or do you feel that competency plays like a unique kind of role with that?
I think it'll largely like differ per person. I think for me, competency and being, quote unquote good at my craft is something that's been so important for me for so many years. But I know so many people that just surrender when they sing, and maybe they're not, as advanced, or maybe that's not something that matters to them. So I would say that I don't think there's really a connection, but maybe for some people there is, and maybe that's a con of having been trained and, knowing right from wrong.
Hmm. I mean, I'm so excited to get into Super Singer. I normally have a flow for the conversation, but I have so
Yeah.
many questions coming into my mind that I'm like, tell me so I'm just straight fireballing them at you. But
Of course.
so Super Singer, for context, and I'd love to get more context from you, but it's like the X Factor, American Idol, in Tamil Nadu, which is the southernmost state in India, and it's massive. There's a huge television culture there, and so everybody's locked in. Everyone has a TV at home. A lot of the older people, everyone's just watching TV all the time, and
Yeah.
so everyone's kind of tuned into this show, and it's really competitive, and it goes around the whole year. And one, how did you find out about the opportunity to go on that show, and when did you commit? When were you like, okay, I'm gonna go do this thing and leave the States?
Yeah, it's actually a funny story. My mom submitted one of my concert tapes without really telling any of us, and it was just her own, way of being like, I think my daughter's fantastic, and, I just want to know if they're going to listen to it and think the same. And they happened to get back to us, and it was, when she told us, it was a complete, we were like, well, what do you mean? We're obviously not going to do that. And then she was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I just wanted them to respond, and I wanted them to like validate what I was thinking. We sort of set it aside. The, channel called back, and they were like, we're really excited about her, and we really want to meet you guys. So we happened to already be going to India because my grandparents lived there. So we're like, okay, we'll already be there. We'll come and say hi, but like, we're not committing to anything. And then we met them. They were just super excited about it, and the rest is sort of history. And the funny thing is, I don't really remember making an active decision. I think I was just like too young. And so, I mean, I'm super glad everything went down the way it did, but I think for me more it was like, oh, I have to leave my friends, or like, but I want to
Yeah.
go do this really cool thing and like be on TV. And so I don't think I was like, weighing the pros and cons the most logical way, but I'm glad my parents did.
Hmm. What I'm trying to understand is, I was telling you this about briefly earlier, but I've never been in a situation where I've had maybe more than, I think in elementary school, I sang at a variety show. So that's probably the
Yeah.
peak, having eyes on me. And that was maybe, I would say, 300 kids, all less than 10 years old. And that's probably it. And the experience of knowing that you're being perceived is a really interesting thing, because I think it's sometimes, like you said, very out of body also, because you're just like, you're no longer, you're like, I don't even know how many people are watching this or watching me at this current moment. And for you, it was in the millions. And so I'm curious, what was that like for you internally? I mean, when did you start? How did you process? Okay, I'm being perceived by a lot of people that possibly can't even comprehend. What was that like for you?
I think it was kind of an overnight thing. And again, I keep saying this because it was so important to the experience, is that I was really young. I was 14 years old when all of this was happening, and I was on TV, I was doing my thing, and like Instagram was very early stages back then. Like, not everybody knew Facebook, like having a Facebook page was a bigger deal back then. Um, and our show scheduling was so rigorous that we wouldn't really get time off, and we wouldn't be out and about and, shopping or going out to eat or anything like that. But there was a time that I think we had like a week off or maybe 10 days off. And my mom and I and a couple of us from the show, went to the mall to like hang out. And we got absolutely mobbed by people there. Like, we couldn't get in, we couldn't get out. And it was, I think that's my like most vivid experience of being like, oh my God, all these people know who I am, and they like watch me on TV. And then I remember like Instagram followers going up, Facebook followers going up, and just people just being so excited about the show. And I think that's like my first, recollection of realizing that there were that many people like so invested, and sort of like that many eyes on me.
I've worked at some schools that have really interesting perspectives on competition, and it's something that a lot of education experts talk about, and it's a really interesting kind of thing. And the big question is, how effective is competition? Does it help people find passion, love? Does it push them to go above and beyond, or does it kind of just taint whatever it is that they're doing, and does it make them lose love for the essence of whatever it is? I know you said you were 14, but do you remember the competitive edge of it, or were you able to kind of within yourself be like, okay, this is an experience, I'm loving it, but I'm not going to get too lost in whether I win or lose, or however the outcome is. Do you remember some of those feelings?
Yeah, that is such an interesting question because I think that sort of ties back to Fremont and like the upbringing as well, right? And I think about this all the time. And I think whether we realized it or not, or whether our parents realized it or not, or at least for me, I don't want to speak on behalf of your experience too, but going to school in Fremont was a very competitive experience. And I think, academically, you're at one of the top schools in the nation, and everybody is incredibly intelligent, and you're competing in every class, every score, every extracurricular, every college acceptance at a very, very high level. And I think for me personally, I think that helped in shaping sort of the person that I was from a very young age. Also having competed in, music competitions outside of Super Singer sort of fueled that, like desire to want to be competitive and want to be, in that 1% or above the rest or whatever it may be. And I think, I mean, I kind of argue on both sides. And the reason is that I feel like having that level of competition from being, at such a young age can truly be detrimental in many ways, if not controlled and if not, carefully understood and walked through. But I think it sort of sets you up for what the real world is like, because I think maybe this was before we started recording, but we were just talking about like, life just gets harder after, you move out of your parents' house and you're in college and you're in the real world, and then you have to get a job and all of these things. And I think that the experience, not only going to school and growing up in Fremont and the competitiveness of that, but also kind of the competitiveness on a much larger scale, on an international audience in front of millions of people. For me personally, I think it helped a lot. And it kind of gave me this mindset of like, okay, I did that. That means I can do anything, And that was maybe one of the harder experiences that I had in my life, because there was always a part of me that was like, wow, this is a larger than life experience, and it's okay if I don't win, and, we're going to go through it and we're going to enjoy it. That part of me was always there, because at the end of the day, it was a reality show. And, crazy things happen on reality shows. But I think there was a part of me that was very competitive, and I think that constantly pushed me week after week to find the best version of myself. And I think that mindset is something that I carry, with me every single day. That being said, I think I'm glad that competitiveness from such an early age pushed me to where I'm at right now, but it's very easy that, it couldn't have.
So in a lot of ways, what I'm hearing you say is that because of what Fremont was like, it kind of prepared you to handle the competitive nature of Super Singer, and you were able to find that balance, right?
Absolutely.
What did you feel like? So, you went all the way to the end, I think, and you were top 2 or 3. Is that correct? 3?
Yeah. 2.
And
yep.
2. All right. 2. Yeah. Top 2. And so what was your, initial feeling right after the show had ended? And so how did it feel for you? Were you grateful? Were you sad that you had come so close and had, I mean, it must have been I can't even imagine. What was it? I actually want to share one thing. I want to throw one thing, just because I haven't said this on the show yet. I have one moment like this. I used to, in the 7th grade, I played, it's called NJB. It's like a little youth basketball league. And I was so bad when the league had started, but by the end I was like an okay player. and the
Yeah.
last shot had come up, and we were gonna win the game. We had to win this game. It was like a playoff, and I missed the three to win the game. But I did well the rest of
Oh,
the game, but I missed the
yeah.
three. For some reason, that just stuck in my head because I was like, that was the first time where I felt like I had come so close. The opportunity to win was in my hand, and then I fumbled it.
Absolutely.
And I remember driving home in the car, and my dad had told me something like, it doesn't really matter in the big scale of things. But when I think back to that moment, and if someone was to come up to me like that, and how I would respond, I think the nihilistic kind of approach to handling loss sometimes is not the best way to go about it. Because in that moment, it does matter to you. To just be like, hey,
Yeah.
in the big scale of things, you're going to die. It doesn't really matter. Don't worry about it. I think sometimes can't be the most helpful because in that moment, to you, it feels like this really matters and you want it to matter and it's important for you to matter. So
Absolutely.
navigating that so that you don't fully lose yourself in any moment where you're like, okay, this didn't work out the way I want, therefore life is over.
Yeah.
I think that can be, you can take that to an extreme, but having that ability to kind of take a little bit of a step back, not too far of a step back to like just be apathetic and not care about anything, but a slight step back to be like, okay, this hurt, but I want to experience the feeling of what this gives me and how can I take that forward moving forward. I think it's such a beautiful, delicate balance, but when it can be done right, each failure offers this opportunity to experience a whole range of beautiful emotions. So I'm just so curious, comparing my one basketball shot to your experience where you had spent months, you uprooted your
Yeah.
life, you moved, you competed for so long, you came so close. What was that like right after it had finished?
Yeah, I think I think my quote unquote loss was a little bit different, just because I feel like I knew for a fact that not everything was in my hands. And for me, in that moment, it was about being the best I could possibly be,
Hmm.
and doing the most that I could do. And like I'd mentioned before, you're on reality TV and you have millions of people watching you. So there's a lot of different, things at stake that are not necessarily in your hands. And I think I go back to keep saying that I was a kid because I wasn't experiencing a lot of these emotions in the most mature way. I wasn't able to it was hard for me to take a step back and be like, this was for the greater good. I think right after the competition, I came in second, and it was really hard. It was quite tough on me. But I also had this ego and this confidence in myself. I knew that I was the best that day, and I knew that the title should have been mine. But I think it's so funny the way life plays out. I feel like the reason I'm here today and so many of the things that followed that quote unquote loss is the reason that I'm here today. And whether I won or not, or really had the title or not, didn't matter in the grand scheme of things because my life played out in the best possible way. And I had an extremely successful and continue to career right after that, being a singer and doing exactly what I wanted to do. That it's funny that people still remember that moment and they're like, you should have won, or things should have gone differently. And sure, it stings when you're on this massive stage getting a second place trophy when you should have been first. But I think now it's been long enough for me to sort of ruminate on it and be like, I'm so glad that that happened, because every opportunity I got was because of that. And because I was,
Hmm.
I was the best that I could possibly be. So a little bit different than, missing the three, but not to rub it in at
It
all.
should have gone in. It
It
should
should
have
have gone
gone
in.
in. We would have won.
A little bit different, but I've got to say, I mean, not winning anything you think you should have won just sucks at any age.
Hmm. I mean, I think it's really beautiful what you said, where it seems like without judging a certain loss, quote unquote loss in the moment, giving patience and time to see how certain things turn out allows you to have the gracefulness as you're going through that experience. Do you feel like
Absolutely.
now, because of that, the way you handle a lot of your quote unquote losses now also has been shaped by that, and you're able to give yourself more grace as you go through the challenges and obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like for it to be, I think being sort of an entertainment and, being an actor, being a musician, so much of what you do is kind of in the control of other people or in other hands that you don't have much control over. I'm not going to lie, every loss stings, every role that you miss, every song that's not in your voice stings. But I think that major life experience definitely sort of helps put things into perspective when I'm able to take a step back and, when something really hurts and you're like, well, I really wish that had worked out. It's like, well, something, so major in your life didn't exactly work out the way you wanted it to, and you're, so perfectly happy now. So maybe that's a moment to reflect.
We were talking a little bit about before this show about identity. And I think one of the most, it's interesting. I mean, this is kind of, when you were on the show, my mom watches the Super Singer a lot. I think it's one of her, she watches Big Brother too, but she really likes that show. And, and I remember, she'd be like, oh, wait, this girl from Fremont, I think, is actually on the show. And I was like, oh, no way, I actually know her. And it was just like, and one of the really interesting things to me, and I was always curious to hear your perspective on this, was when you were, to my Tamil side of the family and just to all the people I know who are you were this huge icon in India at that time. But then you would talk about how, you eventually went to UCLA, you came back, and then you'd be walking on the streets and, it's a very different experience where you're no longer that same huge icon. And I always think about that with Rajinikanth, for example, where I'm like, he's this, one of the biggest South Indian actors. But if he was to leave, I'm not, he would look like any other uncle if he was walking around in Florida. If he was, no one would know. I'm always curious what your mind has to do to be able to navigate both of those at the same time. To be in some environments, everyone knows me. And in others, I'm just another person on the street. What was that dichotomy like for you? And was it kind of weird at first?
I think that was the norm for me. And it took me a really long time to realize that it wasn't exactly normal, because that's not what most people go through. Kind of at the peak of the time that I was on TV and, had all this recognition, I just had my, first big movie release. I didn't live in India, so I would do all this stuff in India and it would release in India, and then I would be back home in Fremont. And I think what happens then is that you don't really realize the magnitude of what is coming out, how many people are listening to it, how many people are watching it, and you just have sort of no idea, right? And I would go on tour and, hundreds of thousands of people are coming to your concerts, and then you kind of get a taste of wow, all these people in the randomest places in the world are listening to my music. But then I still went back home. I would never go, I didn't spend so much time in India to the point where the recognition really, I was able to really experience that on a day-to-day basis. And like I told you, right after I came back and I moved to LA to go to college, and I would travel to India frequently, but it was I never stayed there for long enough to really feel the success or the fame of anything. It's been interesting more recently where I was kind of telling you, I feel like it's kind of an on and off switch, because I go out to the grocery store here and, go places here, and obviously people don't recognize me or stop me. But then when I go to India, I forget that, I'm still a familiar face. And so you catch these people just sort of staring at you. And it takes me a couple days to sort of get used to the new environment I'm in and the new restrictions I have and, what that means for me. And it's oh, now I get why they're staring. So it's almost like a switch that you kind of have to turn on and off to sort of realize. So I think that's been my normal, and I don't think that that's normal for any other, person that's experienced some sort of recognition or, fame in some industry, but that's sort of what it's been for me. It's kind of on a much, much larger scale, if Rajnikant lived in, Florida, like you said.
Yeah, exactly.
And just went to Chennai and shot all these movies and was the biggest superstar in the world, and then came back to Florida and, went to the grocery store. I feel like it would be a very different experience than the superstar he is in Chennai.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
identity is something that's so fascinating and something that, when we talk about, I've had a few podcast guests recently, John Krieger, where we talked a lot about identity. And I think it's a really integral part of any person as they get older, and to identify who are you, what is the context in which you live in, and who are you to the people around you, your society, and whatever is playing at large. I think one thing that's really interesting in your experience is you had to simultaneously take on the roles of two very different identities. Do you feel that at any particular point, you talked a little bit about this switch of being like, okay, did you ever feel like it was hard to merge the two? Do you still feel like you have two distinct personalities, or do you feel like they blend into each other?
I think they do blend into each other. And I think that's probably been in the last couple of years where you feel just a lot more secure in the person that you're becoming and a lot more
Mm,
clear about, your identity. And again, I think, when you gain so much recognition when you're so much younger, you don't really know what to do except to like put on a face of satisfying people when you are this public personality and you want everybody to like you. And, maybe that's like a version of yourself. And then you sort of retreat to, or at least for me, I sort of retreated to being myself when, the cameras weren't on me or I wasn't in a, publicly recognizable place. But I think I've gotten so much more comfortable with being like, there's gonna be people that don't like me or that don't appreciate what I do or that have things to say, but I'd much rather show them who I really am. And so I want to say that there's a lot more merging happening than like having two distinct personalities.
mm. That merging process can be so therapeutic in so many ways. I found that, yeah, that was a big thing I think a lot of children of immigrants have to do, especially in the United States, where you have the version of who you are at home versus the version of who you are at school or outside, and over the years is when you start putting those together, and then you start to become, okay, this is who Gautam is, not Gautam home, Gautam school, Gautam work.
Yes.
It's a very important, I think, process. Something I'm really interested to understand is because I haven't had a lot of exposure to the entertainment industry, and I've never
Mhm.
lived in LA, which I was telling you about earlier, that I really want to, just to understand it. And this is a really broad question, so I don't know how. You
Yeah.
can start wherever you want, but I'm really curious to understand because I think entertainment plays such a vital role in everyone's life in understanding the culture and society that they live in. I mean, when I think about really important things like love, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a good friend? What does it mean to be a good person? A lot of that came from film and music.
Yeah.
And entertainment played a vital role in me understanding my role in this world. And so now that you've had kind of a backdoor understanding of entertainment as well, what are some of the main insights you feel like you've been able to pull from your experiences in entertainment?
I feel like more recently it's been the social responsibility, and it's interesting you say that because I feel like I've had this massive realization as well, is that we're fed with so much content on a daily basis, and whether that's short form content, long form content, the amount of content that we have access to has grown exponentially, and I think that's sort of dictating a lot of the way that people learn and grow, like these days. And I think with that comes a lot of responsibility, especially when you're in the industry or you're more so responsible for the content that's being put out there, right? Whether you're a content creator, whether you're a producer, whether you're a filmmaker, whatever it may be. Um, I think that's played a really large, that's been a huge understanding for me. That being said, I think making a TV show or making a movie is such a complex web of hundreds of people that need to come together to make this thing happen that I often feel like there's some people that are, sort of brought in to just play this character and, just as an actor, and they don't really necessarily have a lot of say in what the content is like, or is if this is conveying a politically correct message, or is this the right type of story that needs to be told, because it comes from the top down. And
Mm.
I think that's what's really difficult, is because they're often the people that get blamed the most because they're probably the most popular or famous or whatever it may be. And I think that's the sort of the same sort of like revolution that we've been going through now, where like being brown in Hollywood has become this like super cool new thing because now everybody wants diverse casts, right? And so everyone wants to include like a token brown person or a token Asian person or token AAPI person in their cast so that it is diverse and inclusive. And um, I like viewing it from like the positive angle of it where it's like, that's great. There's so many more roles for us out there and all of that. But I think for us to really um, see Asian American people making a difference is when we're kind of at the top and making those decisions, right? So we don't want to play the nerdy, Indian kid on every show or every movie. Like we can be just as able and just as have just as strong of a presence as any other character on that list. So I think it's it's really hard to force people to understand like what the back end of that looks like because we often, the people on screen or the people that are more popular often take the blame. But I think social responsibility and kind of like where, how many people and how many different sort of entities need to come together to kind of put something of, quality out is something that I've largely been thinking about.
If you were to have full control and agency over what messages you were putting out in your movies or songs, what would you feel like is one of the kind of core messages that you would like to put out?
This is another thing that I struggle with because when you have that kind of audience and when you have that kind of agency, there's so many, things that you would want to share to that number of people. But there's
Mm,
also the piece of entertainment where it is there to entertain, and there's so many people that,
mm,
come home from a long day of work and just want to chill and watch something fun or, go to the movies because they want to break from, the struggles of life. And so how do you sort of tie those two things together, make sure that people have
mm,
fun while you're also, catering to or you have the responsibility of thousands of millions of people watching. So I think that in between sort of needs to be found. And I don't know. I don't know if there's something super top of mind that I would really, want to communicate right off the bat. Um, but I think for me, it's more about finding that healthy medium so you don't, you're not making this just because you have social responsibility.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's a really nice way to put it. It doesn't always have to be about messaging because sometimes it can
Yeah.
just be, yeah, but
Yeah.
then also being a little intentional that a lot of people do build their entire worldviews through this to have kind of understand both, I think can be a really nice balance. Have
Definitely.
you enjoyed being, would you say, when you reflect on being in the entertainment industry? Because you said something earlier I wanted to kind of round back on because I think it can be so challenging when, take this podcast, for example. I've really, from the beginning, tried to take on an approach where I focus on the love of each single one of these conversations. If I judge how good this conversation does based on like the number of listens I'm going to have a high and low every other episode. I'm going to have a high every
Yeah.
time episode. It's not even in my hands anymore. And so I
Yeah.
lose complete control of it. But like you said, sometimes when your career depends on how many people consume the things that you do, you no longer can just be so careless about tracking some of those metrics. So how do you find peace within the work that you do and try to make it so that it's a little irrespective of how many people consume it or how many likes you get on something? I mean, that must be so challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a constant battle and anybody who says that, they don't or they don't read the comments or they don't look at the likes are probably lying just because our work is so, contingent on that. But I think being more secure in the type of work that you're doing and your personal feeling about the outcome of what has come out, and I think that kind of goes back to feeling extremely happy and extremely satisfied with what you're putting out into the world. And I think, at not at a, crazy large scale, if you're, signed to a label and you have all these fans and you're putting out all this music, it's bound to get somewhere, right? But everyone has sort of a threshold of what looks good to them and what feels good to them. And I think the more I've kind of delved into different sort of art forms and been in different pieces of entertainment, I think at the end of the day, it's just something that you need to feel passionate about. And it's getting to that place of security where you're just like, I am so secure in this piece of content that I'm putting out that I don't care what happens to it. And I'm nowhere near there, but I think that that's one way to get closer to, to ignore the likes and the comments in some ways.
Thank you so much for breaking all of this down. I mean, I think there's so many, it's cool, how we can all start from the same city with relatively similar experiences and just kind of everybody just goes in their own pathways.
Absolutely.
I have friends who've worked with, veterans and worked in PTSD with and they have such interesting stories and you went on this competition and, performed in front of 100,000 people. And that's such each person kind of travels in their own unique path and gets such a unique perspective on the world. And I think it's fascinating to hear some of yours. I want to transition and talk a little bit about your most current work, with a lot of your entrepreneurship work with Soma Ayurvedic. So one, I want to ask you what inspired you to do that. And two, if you could actually define maybe what Ayurveda is, I think that would also be amazing.
Yeah. Ayurveda is one of the oldest, sciences in the world, and it's kind of yoga's sister science, which I think is probably the easiest way for a lot of people to understand it. And more than being a science, I think it's kind of a lifestyle. It's what you put on your body, what you put in your body, the kind of, how you wake up, what you do as soon as before you go to bed. It's very much a lifestyle that's, been around for thousands of years, that originated in India. And Soma Ayurvedic is a very, personal project to me. And I've always been, had sort of that entrepreneurial spirit, and I, always wanted to start something. And I think for me, Soma Ayurvedic is just sort of the perfect tie-in between, that identity that we've talked about between India and the US. And I came to realize that a lot of, ingredients and a lot of formulations and a lot of the products that people were using in the US were native to India, and they just didn't know it, or they weren't getting the purest form of it. And that's kind of what, where Soma Ayurvedic was born. And, we've transitioned into being more of a fragrance house. And I think in that sort of journey, come to realize that, there's so many sandalwoods, there's so many jasmines, there's so many vetivers and ouds, but all of that is actually sourced from India and then taken to, France to sort of formulate into a fragrance. Whereas, in India, we have, so many destinations that date back to the Silk Route that are known for making perfumes with these ingredients that they find, within India. And I think that that's sort of what inspired that idea, and that's sort of how we transitioned into being a fragrance house and sort of spreading the message of Ayurveda to people that may not necessarily know sort of where some of their products and ingredients come from.
And so if people are interested in learning more, where can they find some of these products? And
somaayurvedic.com, SOMAAYURVEDIC. We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. We have a website as well.
And I will attach that to the show notes. Yeah. And I mean, that it's fascinating. Did you know when this was something you wanted to commit to as well? Was there like a period where you're like, this is what I want to do?
Not really. It was a very sort of serendipitous thing. My co-founder Arjun was on this journey of learning more about Ayurveda and wanted to start something of his own as well. And I think we just met at the perfect time and were able to come together on this, where I had a lot of connections back to India and a lot of inspiration from there, and he had a lot of experience on the business side of things, and it was just sort of born, over a cup of coffee. So it wasn't really a super active decision, and it just sort of happened.
Nice. It's something I'm realizing now, that it is those coffee conversations that somehow, someone says one thing, one idea is planted, and then all of a sudden, weeks or years or, decades later, it becomes this whole thing. And you're like, we really came here from one coffee conversation, which is fascinating.
Absolutely.
So tying back, we started at Fremont, tying this whole journey that you've been on since. And I forgot to mention, you also were at UCLA for a couple years, correct?
I was, yeah. I did my undergrad there.
What were you studying there?
I was pre-law at UCLA with a concentration in entertainment law, which I think definitely has helped me in many ways, but decided not to go to law school.
Pre-law, but what made is that a major pre-law?
Yeah, it's like a
Ah,
track that you
oh,
can,
cool.
yeah.
But what's like the specific? I've never heard. Like, what is the specific kind of? Is there a name to the major that you
Yeah,
studied?
so it's music, business, political science, and economics. It's like a
Oh, cool. Yeah,
mush
yeah, yeah.
of all three.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I mean, because tying all of this back to Fremont and also your education at UCLA, a lot of what I'm hearing from your story is confidence, courage to go into the unknown and to like full send. And I feel like that comes time and time again in so many different aspects. What do you think are some of the relationships between skills and mindsets that you picked up in your early education that allowed you to go so boldly into the world?
I think when you kind of dive in one, insane pursuit that everyone says is insane and is a very large, crazy thing to do, and it works out in your favor, it sort of gives you this like almost like delusion in some ways that like anything I do is going to work out. And I think I kind of touched on it before, where I was like, if I did that, if I was on TV for a year with, everything working against me and like people saying all sorts of things about me on the internet, and I got through that, alive and successfully, I can do anything. And I think that delusion has sort of set up the stage for my entire life. Which, I am very, very grateful for. But I will say, so much of that confidence and so much of that competitive edge and that, ability to trust and sort of full send came from, growing up in Fremont and having, very successful parents and very supportive parents and a very supportive, group of friends that I was definitely competitive with and that I loved being around. And I think so many of these experiences of just do it and find out, came from the way that I was brought up.
Mm, yeah, when I think about it, I think growing up in Fremont really sets the bar so high.
It does,
Everybody's really doing something.
unfortunately.
And so it's interesting. I had a friend, we were chatting a little bit about the difference between jealousy and envy, where jealousy could be defined as looking at what someone has and saying, I don't like that you have that. I wish you could come down to my level. Where
Yeah,
envy is more from a place of like, it could be from a place of, okay, I like what you have, you've set the bar, now let me try to surpass that. And then you constantly have this relationship where one person does that to the other, and you both kind of
100%.
increase the game through that. In your in living in that hyper competitive area, how do you kind of navigate between these two spaces of jealousy and envy? Because it naturally arises all the time. I mean, I'm constantly kind of navigating between those two spaces. And I feel that I think it's a very common journey for people in their 20s to find peace within themselves, but also find inspiration within others, which takes a sense of, okay, I really like what you have. I want to chase that as well. How have you kind of
Absolutely.
navigated that? Yeah.
I think it's a battle every day, and I think we have so many more modes of comparison the more and more people and things we see. And
Mm,
I talk about this a lot, but most of what we see online is a highlight reel, and we don't really see the difficult things that people go through, and we see so much of just accomplishment after accomplishment of travel, of incredible fun things. I bought a new car, I bought a new house, and these incredible like career achievements. And I think I've been so hyper aware of that, especially when scrolling or, looking at other people's updates, that I've been very intentional about this jealousy versus envy, where I do catch myself in moments where I'm just like, how could you have that? Like, how dare you and not I? And, sort of snapping myself out of it and being like, you don't really know what the full story is. And, your life is just so drastically different from this random person that you're seeing online. Snap out of it. That's probably not even what you want. And so I think it is a daily battle, because it's not a very linear industry, and it's not a very like linear career path by any means. people have sudden surges of, virality or success or, money or fame or whatever it may be. And then, it's so up and down, and it's such a roller coaster that you really can't model your life and career off of anyone else's. And I think it's something that's a daily reminder.
And the more, I think you said something earlier, and I think it really is something that I want to circle on, which is just this idea of when we talked about singing and finding that, but it's really finding the reason why. And when you can know that the quality of whatever it is that you're putting out is the best that you possibly can do, there's a sense of peace that comes with that becomes really hard to rattle. And I think this is something is becoming very clear as I become older, which is just that if you're not confident in what you do, then all of a sudden, every single time you see someone else do something better, or, make more money, or get married or have children, whatever it is, all of a sudden it shakes your very foundation that you're on. And I think being rooted in what it is that you do is so key. Do you have practices that help you kind of become rooted in your own day to day, like what it is that you're doing, your singing, your journey, your acting, whatever it is?
I think the answer to your question is no. I don't have, certain practices, and I wish I had better methods that kind of bring me back to that. But I think, speaking with mentors and having a very solid foundation of people around me, whether that's friends, whether that's family, whether that's mentors, has been instrumental in kind of realigning with that purpose and making sure that you're really going towards something that you feel very strongly about rather than just floating. And I think it's been particularly hard, at this age, like what you were saying, right? Because there's people that are basically our age in drastically different stages of life. So it's very difficult not to compare and be like, well, am I doing something wrong? Or like, or should I be doing something else? But I think maybe the answer to your question from me, the way that I'm trying to stay rooted and kind of going back to finding my purpose is by checking in with the people around me and sort of having a lot of conversation about, this is how I'm feeling and this is what I want to be doing, and what does that mean in the grander scheme of things? And maybe people more accomplished, maybe people older, maybe people younger, but I've found that has been extremely helpful for me.
When you look back on your journey, what would you say is one of the things that you find a deep sense of grounding and pride in? What is something you're like, I did that and I put my best foot forward?
I don't think it's necessarily one experience, but I think for me, the fact that most of what I've done is generally unconventional, in the sense that, a kid growing up in Fremont doesn't really go on to be on TV and, pursue a career in entertainment, probably a very small percentage of us. And I think I take a lot of pride in taking those leaps and kind of taking that, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it 100%. And whether it happens or it fails is secondary. And I think I'm still very much in that mindset. And that's something that I do pride myself on.
If there is one lesson that you could pass forward to someone who is, and I'm interested to hear too, because I feel like there's so much uncertainty in the path that I want to take with my life and the things that I want to do. What is something you feel like you've learned in regards of what you would tell somebody who's about to take an unconventional path? It's not really clear whether it'll work out or not, but they're going to go for it. What is maybe a word of advice that you'd give them?
I think my word of advice would be that you're not going to know until you fully dive in. And I think it's always great to have a plan B and to feel secure in that. But I think unless you're 150% doing what you want to do, I don't think people realize that if it doesn't work out, it's not going to be the end of the world. And I think that would 100% be my advice, because you're not going to know whether something works or not unless you give it everything you've got.
And often people say when you have one foot in, still in the door and one foot out, it oftentimes doesn't. And so, like we said earlier, that ability to full send really sometimes is what helps somebody succeed.
100%. I agree with that.
Just like reflecting on this whole journey from where we started the conversation to now, I think, thank you so much for everything that you've shared. I think it's a really beautiful story, and I'm excited to see what your plans are. What is kind of your vision for what you want to do with, I guess maybe if I say the rest of your life, that's too far, but what about the next, let's say maybe the next decade?
Oh, next decade. I feel like I'm thinking in increments of like 1 year right now. So I'm hoping to put out a lot more music. I'm hoping to, I have a couple of really exciting projects in the works. Still figuring out how I'm splitting my time between two different continents. Traveling as much as I possibly can, whether that's performing in new places or just, going somewhere to experience something new. I think those are a couple things on my list.
Super exciting. Yeah. And so people can find you on Spotify under, do you have just Pragathi Guruprasad?
Just Pragathi Guruprasad. Yes.
Just Pragathi. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. This was a lovely conversation.
No, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.